A done deal. The government and opposition joining forces to ram through contentious gambling reforms.
This legislation concentrates on those who need our help the most, people at most risk of harm. It doesn't preach to the community, but it meaningfully increases protections for those who most need it.
This is a much improved system to what the Prime Minister has proposed, a far improved system.
The government making more than a dozen amendments to its gambling reform legislation. There will be longer restrictions on gambling ads prior to live sporting events, bans on the payment of commissions to gambling staff for getting people to bet more, and an industry-funded opt-out register.
Ad stop to back up the previous bet stop legislation introduced by the former minister that previously to this legislation was the most significant anti-gambling measure ever.
Gambling companies know who to target to bet more. These amendments will require them to use that intelligence to identify and protect potentially vulnerable customers.
The breakthrough follows years of debate and 2 parliamentary inquiries, but crossbench critics were left underwhelmed.
Today's collusion between Labor and the Liberals shows yet again that the major political parties in this country care more about the media interests, sporting codes and gambling companies than they do about their constituents.
From where I sit, Mr Angus Taylor looks more like Toto than he does the Leader of the Opposition.
Even members of the coalition complained the changes fall short of the recommendations made 3 years ago in a review led by the late Labor MP Peter Murphy, and this month's Senate inquiry that heard claims of drug and cash inducements offered to gambling addicts.
I won't make any friends in the coalition by saying I think we're being weak by not implementing those reports, and I think we'd be supported by the majority of the public out there.
I extolled my colleagues for a number of weeks, many weeks, about the problems with the bill in its then form, in its form today.
Both men crossed the floor and voted against the legislation, but the opposition maintains it's done the right thing.
This, for the first time, combats predatory inducements. It bans the direct marketing of predatory inducements to red-flagged customers.
The gambling reforms are now headed to the Senate, where they're expected to pass before the end of the week with the coalition's blessing. Part of a broader set of deals weeks in the making that came to fruition this morning after being endorsed by the Labor and Coalition party rooms. The Coalition agreeing to back Labor's multi-billion-dollar NDIS spending cuts on one condition, that the government dumps budget tax changes that disadvantage divorcees and widows.
Yesterday I wrote to the PM and made our position crystal clear. We could not support the changes to the NDIS unless they axed the widow's tax. He caved, cleaning up the mess of his treasurer, and after 98 days of delay, a tax that should never have been introduced, will be axed.
The result is that widows will be spared, but some NDIS recipients will eventually be pushed off the scheme, which the government says is growing at a pace that is financially unsustainable.
I know this is hard reform and I know it's causing anxiety in parts of the community, Speaker, but it is essential.
This bill represents the end of the NDIS, as it was promised and as we have known it.
Since being established more than a decade ago, the scheme's spending growth has surged at a double-digit rate. The government says its changes will crack down on fraud while ensuring supports are maintained for those with high or critical care needs.
In about 10 years, there will be a little boy or a little girl and they will be born with a disability, a very significant disability, and I want that child and their family to know that this scheme is here.
Despite criticism and disappointment that the Prime Minister wasn't more ambitious on gambling reform, this parliamentary fortnight looks to have tackled many of the most urgent items on the government's to-do list, likely opening the door to the next big fight, how the government intends to curb immigration numbers.
And political editor Jacob Greber is with me now. Jacob, just to start with, is it quite proper to liken the Leader of the Opposition to the Prime Minister's canine friend?
Sarah, that's a blonde cavoodle that we're talking about, Toto the dog. I'd hate to know who'd be more upset, the cavoodle or the opposition leader. Look, obviously, emotions running hot there. She's making the point that he has rolled over to the government's demands, wants, needs on this gambling legislation.
But is that completely fair, Jacob? Because before that inquiry that we saw last week and also in the week before, the Prime Minister had said if you don't like it, you can stick with the status quo. He didn't want to have to go through all of this, did he?
He didn't. He was pushed to this point really by both his own backbench and quite a small but loud and effective group on the coalition side who felt very strongly that the government was not doing enough on the gambling legislation. So they've forced in effect both of their leaders, both Angus Taylor and Anthony and Albanese, to make a few changes. Obviously, they would have liked a lot more, and we saw some of them crossing the floor, upset about that. It'll be interesting to see whether everyone on the Labor side is happy with it. But you know, there is a real impact on the broadcasters and the sporting codes. The government's, the departmental numbers tell us that the hit from these restrictions are about $20 million a year for the broadcasters and about double that for the sporting codes. So that's the revenue they get from wagering. For the broadcasters, that's about 30% of their revenue from gambling-related advertising. So it's not nothing, but they'll also be quite relieved that it is nothing like what the real campaigners wanted, which is a total ad ban.
Now, as you referred to in your piece just then, the government is sort of greedy for legislation this week in a sense. It wants a kind of legislative, why do I find that word always so very hard, legislative bonanza by the end of this week. So what else are they trying to achieve by the end of Parliament this week?
Well, I'm certainly not going to say that word now, but they have three big bits of legislation they want to get through. One of them is obviously what we've just been talking about, the gambling legislation. The second is the NDIS. That is going through the Senate tonight, and that will become law. That is a huge reform. It really underpins a great deal of the budget, getting the budget back towards something that vaguely looks like a surplus. If they can't get this done in the way they want it done, that will fall apart. Mark Butler, the minister responsible, putting the onus back on the states tonight, saying it was up to them. It's a question of honour, really, for the states to deliver on these childhood needs, the services that the NDIS will no longer provide, but the states will have to pick up. That's number two. And number three, very much I think related to the first, is the news bargaining incentive law. Now, this will force big tech giants to pay a fine, in effect, for using journalistic content, or they can do deals with media companies. And there's a great deal of interest in this within the media world because a lot of media companies are under financial pressure. And I think it's very significant that the two bills are going through together, the gambling on the one hand and this bargaining incentive on the other. The government can say to the broadcasters, you're going to take a bit of a hit on gambling revenue, but there's this other source of income. And the details are being hashed out, but my information tonight from sources really on both the coalition and the government side is that is very close to being sorted out.
And Jacob, we are yet to see an update on the government's immigration figures. We had that unusual event where Tony Burke cancelled his press club meeting. When are we going to see numbers from the government?
It seems clear it's not happening this week, Sarah. The speech was originally lined up for last week. It was abruptly cancelled, very unusual. Real eye-opener for people who watch the way this government operates. They don't like that kind of a surprise. It seems ever more evident that there was quite a lot of work still to be done around the detail. It's a diabolically complex area. The government needs to get the numbers down, the net overseas migration numbers down to about 220,000. That's still a lot more than what the other side of politics is suggesting. They're suggesting much lower numbers. Either way, whoever it is in charge It's not an easy thing to do, and it takes a great deal of time, and there are lots and lots of ways where it can go wrong. The mail to humble folks like myself here in the press gallery is it won't be this week, but it's not exactly clear when. So that vacuum that has been left by the fact the government is not filling us with any sort of answers about how they get there means that One Nation can continue to make hay on this topic.
All right, Jacob Greber, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, Sarah.